Okay, so let's discuss this passage. So there the questions here with this passage were all inferential based questions, but nonetheless, I believe that this passage was comparatively easier. Let's see how you fare well in this particular passage. So let's start with the para number one. For a language without a physical address that has come frighteningly close to existence, Yiddish will to live seems inexhaustible. Okay, so basically, they say that the for a language without a physical address. So without a physical address means that I mean, like maybe there's no country, okay, of its own, something like this, or maybe not a homeland. So for a language without a homeland, so maybe Yiddish as a language, okay, they do not have a homeland or a country of its own, okay, and because of that, it has come close to extinction, right? Now, Yiddish wills to live seems inexhaustible, so it's close to existence, extinctions, right? Now, the lesson is straightforward. Survival is an act of stubbornness, okay? So they say that the fact that the Yiddish has lasted shows, okay, that persistence and determination alone can be enough to keep something alive, okay? Yiddish has been experiencing something of a revival, okay? So recently, maybe we can see that there has been a renewed interest or kind of some sort of a revival activity in Yiddish, which is kind of giving it a fresh life. Okay. So basically, we can say that they say that the Yiddish does not have any sort of the homeland or a country of its own, and it is nearly disappearing. Okay. But still, its will to live seems inexhaustible. So I missed this idea, right? So that's why I wasn't able to connect to it, right? So they say that Yiddish की कोई country नहीं है अपने आप की नहीं है okay and it is nearly maybe disappearing but yet it continues to survive with remarkable strength, okay, and then they say the lesson is straightforward. Survival is an act of stubbornness, okay, the that kind of I mean like because of their will, okay, and because of their persistence and determination, okay, we can say that that is enough for Yiddish to survive over the years, okay. So, and Yiddish has been experiencing something of a revival. So, something they're saying that Yiddish की country नहीं है, okay, so close to extinction है, लेकिन फिर भी they have kind of their will to live is inexhaustible, okay. So, something Yiddish will to survive, maybe this paragraph is talking about. Now, Yiddish came to life at least a millennium ago. So they say that the language has existed for over 1,000 years. Okay, millennium ago से language Yiddish वाली चल रही है. The earliest historical documents we have date back to the 12th century in the Rhineland in Western Germany as a code switching form of communication. Call this guy. Okay, the language just exposing High German and Hebrew, right? So basically, they say that the kind of the earliest historical documents, or maybe we can say that the first traces, okay, that we have of this languages, okay, since it's a historical documents, we can say something written, maybe, okay, so getting stuck in this, okay, something written documents, okay, so we have for this language, okay, so that kind of comes from the 12th century, okay, and we can say that it kind of it feels that this language is created by just exposing is putting close to each other the opposite ideas basically, okay, so High German and Hebrew, okay, so they say that the first written traces of Yiddish are from 12th century, and kind of this language was emerged or came into the picture, okay, by mixing German, High German with Hebrew, okay, so that's a case, okay, and this was being noted as a code switching form of communication by this known as Lawson, blah blah blah. Okay. Now there is scholarly theory that poses that the combination was High German and Aramaic, which was used by Middle Eastern Jews. Okay. Now they say that some scholars, however, argue that instead of the Hebrew, right, the Yiddish is a kind of started as a blending of High German and Aramaic. Okay. Now, at any rate, Yiddish was the tongue of women, children, and illiterate. Okay. And they say that at any rate, I mean, like, at any rate basically means that regardless of its origin, कि कहाँ से वो है, okay, Yiddish was mainly the tongue of, mainly spoken by, you can say, women, okay, children, and those who are actually illiterate, okay, the people without formal education. So basically, this is talking about the origins of Yiddish, okay. Ki kiska hai first says German, High German, and Hebrew. They say no, High German and Aramaic, and so on, right? So we can say that they say that Yiddish will to survive. They talk about the origin of this language. Let's see what are the other paragraphs talking about. Now, during the Enlightenment, secularist, secularist called masculine depicted Yiddish as a contorted language incapable of civilized thought. Okay, so we can see that the pehle wala paragraph is saying that they are being used by illiterate and others, right? So they say that during the Enlightenment era. So in case if you are preparing for the CAT, you should know about modern era, Enlightenment era, kya tha ye, okay? So there during the Enlightenment era, okay. So there was some secularist, okay. So he said that Yiddish is kind of incapable of civilized thought. Okay, so that means that Yiddish is deformed, and we can say that it is inadequate for the civilized thought. Okay, so something like this. Now, in their view, to be a full fledged European citizen, one needed to speak the language of Goethe, Locke, and Voltaire. So they say that this guy, just a second, and write it here. So they say that in their view, to be a full-fledged European citizen, one needed to speak the languages of Goethe, Locke, and Voltaire, right? So their view किसका हो गया इसका this masculine का. So they say that to be a full-fledged European citizen, I mean like that, in case if you want to be call yourself as a cultured because or a civilized European citizen, because it is kind of showing the contrast between the civilized thought. So in case if you want to consider yourself to be the civilized European citizen, okay, so they say that they have to speak languages like Goethe, Locke, and Voltaire. They are speaking basically, right? So, Goth is basically you can call it as far as remember, this Goth is a German, okay. Locke is a kind of an English, and a Voltaire is definitely a French wala person, right? Now, on the other hand, Hasidism, a religious movement that at the beginning was against the rabbinical establishment, thrived in Yiddish. Okay, now they say that in contrast, there was some sort of a Hasidic movement, okay, that was originally kind of challenging the rabbinical is kind of you can say rabies, okay, I mean like something challenging mainstream rabies, okay, flourished through Yiddish as its main language. Okay, now the embrace of secularism is best represented by the Yiddish literary output of the 19th century, including the most beloved of Yiddish writers, Shalom Alkim, the author of blah blah blah, the Dairyman, a story about a still dweller whose life is redefined by secularization, politics, anti-Semitism, and immigration. Okay, so basically they say that the peak of secular Yiddish culture. Okay, so they say the embrace of secularism is being represented by the Yiddish literary output. Okay, so we can say that kind of in the 19th century, okay, literature that of spatially of this guy Sholem, okay, where he kind of shows you a story about a Swellweller is a kind of a village. Okay, so they say that how this village person life is redefined by secular, okay, and politics and anti-Semitism, okay, and immigration. So that's the case. As in the east of Teve, Yiddish was the lingua franca of Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, Lithuanian, and other Jews, allowing them to have a neutral meeting ground while inhabiting the same stateless culture. Okay, so they say that like in this Sholem stories, okay, so Yiddish was a common language across many you can say Eastern European, we can generally say, okay, Eastern European Jewish communities, okay, so giving them a shared identity because of that, because none of them have a kind of a nation of their own, right? So kind of a technical paragraph, and I mean, like, we could say that the words and the vocabulary that is being used in this paragraph is slightly difficult. I mean, like, with the technical names of the writers and other, but how does it matter? Okay, so basically what they're saying is that there were some people, okay, who believe, secularists say, who believe that Yiddish is not a civilized language. Okay, they believe that all the others language which Goethe, Locke, and Voltaire used, they are the established language. Okay, civilized language, but they say that Yiddish was used in the literary for the rabbis. Okay, and by other countries who also don't have the nation status. Okay, another enemy of Yiddish was Zenoism. Okay, now the Zionist, okay, Zionism, right? So Zionist movement, okay, so they actually opposed Yiddish. Now, in the late 19th century, as the hope for a Jewish state found its ground, it was portrayed as jargon spoken by the diaspora, the language of homelessness without a true national voice. Okay, so they say that kind of this Zionism or Zionist, okay, so they kind of viewed Yiddish as a kind of a low status, okay, so kind of a low level language, okay, that is being just spoken by people, okay, so hope for a Jewish state, okay, so spoken by the Jewish people who are basically homeless, okay, and they do not have their true national language, okay. Now, to combat this deficit, Hebrew needed to be revived, okay. So they say that the Zionists promoted the renewal of Hebrew to replace Yiddish as the true national language. Okay. Now, to combat this, so soon the myth sprung of the Hebrew pioneer in the sharp contrast with the large nosed hunchback Jew that Zionists themselves vilified. Okay. So they say that soon the myth sprung of the Hebrew pioneers, that means that the heroic image of Hebrew speaking Jewish settler was created, okay, that opposed the kind of negative stereotype of the weak and degraded diaspora Jew. Okay, diaspora is a population. Okay, now Hebrew, which officially became the national language of the state of Israel in 1948, is spoken by about 9 million people around the world. Okay, now they say that finally Hebrew succeeded. It became kind of national language for official language for Israel in 1948. Okay, and now it has approximately 9 million people, okay, that speaks this language globally. Okay, so basically that says that what was the impact of Zionism on Yiddish as a language, and how Hebrew was being promoted, right? Now, in contrast, Yiddish represents exile, a longing for home, right? So it says that Yiddish symbolizes kind of Jewish life, okay, and the feeling of yearning for a homeland, right? So, वो भी exile में रहा, represents exile क्योंकि nobody was using that language, okay. It was the backbone of the Jewish labor movement in the United States, and the feminist Emma Goldman championed women's equality and free love in Yiddish, okay. So they say that in America, Yiddish was central to Jewish workers, okay, and Jewish labor movements, and then they say that it was also used by Emma Goldman, okay, to promote feminist and kind of equality and free love in Yiddish. So radical ideas, maybe we can say, right? Abraham Cahan, the Fiesti, commanding editor-in-chief of The Forward, the left-leading Yiddish daily in the New York at the turn of the century, saw the language as a tool for educating Jewish immigrants about their rights. Okay, so they say that there was a Kahan, the leader of the Yiddish newspaper Forwards, okay, and they use the language to teach Jewish immigrants in New York, okay, about kind of their social and political rights. So maybe we can see that here in this paragraph they're talking about how this Yiddish was being revived, okay. So that's the case. Now let's see the last paragraph. Given everything Yiddish has gone through, how it was a tool of cross-border continuity, how it was pushed to the crematories by the Nazis, how after the show it thrived in some diaspora but was pushed aside in others. Its sheer endurance is nothing short of miraculous. And we can see the echoing of the first paragraph now striking back again in the last paragraph, right? So we can see here that considering the Yiddish history, okay, and linking, you can say, Jews across border, okay, being nearly destroyed in crematories by the Nazis. Okay, so we can say that surviving in some places, but again declining in others. Okay, so its sheer endurance is nothing short of miraculous. Okay, so uska jo abhi tak continuous existence hai despite so many issues. Okay, so that is really miraculous and surprising. Yet nostalgia alone cannot push a revival beyond its narrow means. It continues to be the language without a homeland, without any army, a flag, a post office, a central bank, the language of a small dispersed people. Okay. Then again, the author says that just merely giving a sentimental attachment is not enough. Okay. So unlike the national languages, okay, Yiddish has no homeland. Okay, it is without any army or a political backing. Okay, it is just, maybe you can say, the language of a shared Jewish community. Okay, shared tongue of a scattered Jewish communities. Okay, so basically this paragraph is all about the Yiddish language. Okay, it says what was the origin of the Yiddish language, then they say that how this Yiddish as a language was being disparaged. Okay, then it says that Zionism was again one of the enemy of Yiddish. Okay, then they say some of the efforts were being made, and at last the author says that without any this, okay, just the will not be sufficient. Okay, so something like this. Let's actually see the passage. I think so that comprehending the passage here would have given you a difficult time, but I'm sure that the questions were easy and manageable. Okay, now it can be inferred from the passage that the author laments that Yiddish is perceived as symbolizing each of the following except. Okay, so author laments. Okay, उसको क्या मतलब दुख होता है that Yiddish is perceived as symbolizing each of the following except. Okay, homelessness, definitely. Okay, so let me just clear the lines. I mean, like, in case if you have gone through this paragraph, so this becomes an easy negation for you. So clearly the any house, no, we can see the analogy that was being drawn by the author in the passage, where they say that Yiddish with exile. Okay, उसने डायोस्पोरा वाली बात जो बोली थी. Okay, so that's no I mean, like, अगर हम इसकी लैंग्वेज बोले. Okay, ठीक है, it continues to be a language without a homeland. Okay, without this thing. So that was one of the case. Okay, and एक जगह और यहाँ पे आया था, Yiddish has been this, there was this. Okay, brew this and Abraham, where there was one more line, right, where they say that he without physical address, एक कहीं पे उसने, yes, so for a language without a physical address. Okay, and here they say without a homeland. Okay, and then there was a so Yiddish seems inexhaustible. Yiddish, the earliest historical documents this. Okay, secularist to be a full-fledged on the other hand. Okay, just a second. Yeah. So the language of a homelessness without a true national voice. Okay. So these lines definitely show that the author treats homeless, okay, diaspora, which is a lack of homeland, okay, as a meaning people attached to Yiddish. So definitely this is not the answer. So the author laments that Yiddish is perceived as symbolizing each of the following except. So unsophisticated, yes, the author also portrays or depicts the Yiddish language as unsophisticated. Okay, where they say, no, during the Enlightenment, secularists call masculine depicted Yiddish as a contorted language incapable of civilized thought. Okay, so we can say that also the passage, no, say again later on, be they say जहाँ पे वो women, yeah. So here, at any rate, Yiddish was the tongue of women, children, and the illiterate. Okay, so from this we can say that Yiddish was seen as a kind of a low ground, low status, or an unsophisticated language. Okay, now Yiddish is perceived as symbolizing each of the following except non-European. So that is of course the case, the same here, right? So where they say, no, that ये वाला इसका masculine का view. Okay, so depicted Yiddish to be a contorted language incapable of civilized thought. In the view to be fully full-fledged European citizens, one need to speak the to fully full-fledged European citizens. अगर आप European हो तो ये लैंग्वेज है, तो अगर आप ये लैंग्वेज नहीं बोल रहे तो दैट मीन्स दैट यू आर नॉन यूरोपियंस, ओके. So one needs to speak the language of Goethe, Locke and Voltaire, okay. And moreover again यहाँ पे Zionist वाला भी था, where they say no, found it down, it was portrayed as a jargon spoken by the diaspora, okay. So from here also somewhere we can say that the it was a kind of a non-European, it was a sense of a I mean like लैंग्वेज ऑफ अ होमलेसनेस विदाउट अ ट्रू नेशन. सो होमलेस नहीं है तो नॉन यूरोपियन नहीं हुआ है ना. सो दैट्स द केस. नाउ लेट्स सी why anti-Semitic is the exception. Okay. Now, first of all, to understand that, we need to understand that the word anti-Semitism appears in the passage. Okay, ये आया था इसके अंदर, and I'm sure that just because आपको लगा होगा कि ऐसा सा कुछ word हमने passage में पढ़ा है, you would have thought that this is the answer. So anti-Semitism was mentioned here. Okay. But it was only to describe, I mean, like forces acting on Jews. Okay. For example, let's say they say the embrace of secularism is best represented by Yiddish literary output of the 19th century, including the most beloved of Yiddish writer Sholem Aleichem, the author of blah blah blah, a story about a village dweller whose life is redefined by secularization, politics, and anti-Semitism. Okay, but Yiddish is not perceived as symbolizing as anti-Semitic. Okay, uski life, I mean, like it was one of the forces that was acting on this village dweller. Okay, Jews ka village dweller. So that was basically the case. Okay, so Semitism is kind of a historical pressure on Jewish life. Okay, it is not something that Yiddish itself is symbolizing. Okay, so elsewhere the passage treats that Yiddish is a kind of a marker of Jewish identity. Okay, it says that it is also a marker of the low status. Okay, nowhere does the author says that people regard Yiddish as expressing hostility towards Jews or as anti-Semitic. Okay, so that's the case, right? That this is the answer. I hope you are getting this particular thing, right? So the passage perceived Yiddish as symbolizing homelessness है, unsophisticated है, non-European है, okay, but it does not present it as symbolizing anti-Semitism. Now, question number 2, that the lesson is straightforward. Survival is an act of stubbornness. Okay, so we can see here that yes, here is the line. Okay, so which one of the following best describes what the author most likely means by the statement in the context of the Yiddish language, right? So we know this. This was the got it right. So the second is the correct answer. So the survival of Yiddish can be seen as an act of resistance against a world, okay, that has been hostile to the language and its speakers. Okay, so survival is an act of stubbornness. Yiddish has been experiencing something of a revival. So this was the case, right? Now, basically, how would we go to this point that the two is the answer? In case if we have to get into it, so the author says that for a language without a physical address that has come frighteningly close to extinction, Yiddish will to live seems inexhaustible. The lesson is straightforward. Okay, survival is an act of stubbornness. Okay, so that means that stubbornness is kind of your resistance. Okay, कि आप उसको यदिश को extinct नहीं करना चाह रहे. Okay, so it's kind of, we can say that the stubbornness and resistance, okay, that almost means the same. Okay, and again we can say that so the survival of Yiddish can be seen as an act of resistance because ये ना कोई language नहीं है, so it's frighteningly close to extinction. लेकिन Yiddish wills to live seems inexhaustible. So the survival of Yiddish can be seen as an act of resistance against a world that has often been hostile to its language and its speaker. Okay, and in case if we go directly in the passage, then we get that no, during the Enlightenment, secularists call this. Okay, so they say that it is incapable of civilized thought. Okay, so this also shows that there is some sort of hostility that people try to marginalize this language. Okay, so that we can say that against a world that has been hostile. Okay, so this is also true कि वो hostile है. Okay, in fact अगर हम ideologies by Zionism की बात करेंगे, okay, so they what they have written is that another enemy of Yiddish was Zionism. Okay, and again they say that it was portrayed by as a jargon spoken by the diaspora, that is a language of homelessness without a true national voice. Okay, so that is the case, and because of this only, they actually worked upon Hebrew. Okay, they revived Hebrew. So that is the case. So what they want to do is that they want to actually push out this Yiddish. So from that, what we can infer is that the world has been hostile to the language and its speakers. Okay, so that's the case. I hope it gets into, and yeah, there were more lines. So Garabi, I was just looking at. So given everything Yiddish has gone through, how it was a tool of cross-border continuity, how it was pushed to the crematories by Nazis. Okay, so this also shows the hostility. Okay, so and again, a language without a homeland, without an army, without a flaw, the language of a small and dispersed people. Okay, so from all these, we can say, okay, that Yiddish survival, okay, despite all these hostility towards the language and its speaker, okay, Yiddish can be seen as an act of the survival of Yiddish can be seen as an act of resistance. Okay, so it was you can say that exactly, I mean, like what the option number two is saying, that this is right कि उनका will to live seems inexhaustible, so that is the reason उनका resistance. Okay, I hope you got this. Let's see why the other options are not the answers. Now, the survival of Yiddish can be understood as a strong tenacity of the nostalgia associated with the language strong historical root. Okay, now this is not what they are saying. The survival of Yiddish can be understood as a strong tenacity of the nostalgia. Okay, it looks close. Okay, but because yes, they talk about history. Okay, they say that Yiddish came to life at least a millennium ago. Okay, and then we can see that Yiddish has been experiencing something of a revival. Okay, but it does not I mean, like, talk about nostalgia. In fact, there was one line where he mentioned nostalgia somewhere. I remember he talked about yeah, here. So yet nostalgia alone cannot push a revival beyond its narrow means. Okay, so we can see here that this I just dropped my speaker down and I'm assuming that is functioning, right? So the authors, I mean, like you can say that this no that this the survival of Yiddish can be understood as a strong tenacity of the nostalgia. Okay, I mean, like, it is not directly showing that hostile forces. Okay, people were against it, the other countries were against it, yet because of the people's resistance, it survived. बेसिकली वो ये बोल रहा है ना that survival is an act of stubbornness कि वो जिद्दी रहे because उनकी wills to live was inexhaustible. Now from this, that the survival of Yiddish can be understood as the strong tenacity of nostalgia. Okay, so that is I mean, like, nostalgia, the author anyhow, the author negates that the nostalgia alone is not sufficient. Okay, so this cannot be the case, and maybe the um, act of this stubbornness. Okay, and I mean, like, the hostile forces pushes more towards this option of resistance. Okay, not just the sentimental nostalgia. Okay, so that's the case that option B is the better answer. Now the option number C says that stubbornness of Jewish identity which has faced the threat of anti-Semitism. I think the author's favorite word is anti-Semitism. Now, the survival of Yiddish could be seen as an expression of stubbornness of Jewish identity, which has faced the threat of anti-Semitism. Now, anti-Semitism is mentioned, okay, but only as a one external pressure on Jewish village life, okay. So they say, no, that is redefined by secularization, politics, anti-Semitism, and immigration, right? But the passage treats anti-Semitism as something that affects Jews, okay? Not as a core reason that the authors call Yiddish survival as stubbornness, okay? So that is not a case. Anti-Semitism ठीक है वो affect कर रहा था, okay? And more importantly, the passage shows that Yiddish face hostility from many directions, na? Okay? So option number two, oh, I would say that it captures a broader aspect. Okay, and it just narrows the cause to anti-Semitism alone. So सिर्फ anti-Semitism का थ्रेट नहीं था. Okay, कितना तो प्रेशर्स था यहाँ पे भी, इनलाइटन में मैस्कुलिन का था, जियोनिज्म का था, सिर्फ anti-Semitism का तो नहीं था. Narrowing it down, right? Now the Yiddish language has naturally endured through generations owing to its cultural and social significance without a coordinated campaign to keep it alive. Okay, now The passage actually says the opposite. Okay, so they say that it generations. Okay, so the Yiddish language has naturally endured. Okay, so naturally endured, no. Okay, they say that that this language is frighteningly close to extinction. Okay, so and what they are threatening is, what they are saying is that there are a lot of active threats. Okay, people are against this language. Okay, but still the Yiddish will to live and to survive is inexhaustible. Okay. And moreover, it's also no, also nostalgia alone cannot push a revival beyond its narrow meaning. Okay. So the author describes both conscious cultural uses of Yiddish, okay, and kind of we can say that naturally तो नहीं था, that Yiddish language has naturally endured through generations, naturally नहीं आया है. Okay, उनका अपना struggle रहा है. Okay, उनका अपना इनफैक्ट naturally नहीं था, उन्होंने conscious efforts करे थे. Okay, where they say वो बुक वाले का बात हो ना, या forwards में करा था उन्होंने, और लेबर मूवमेंट्स में करा था. ओके, सो वहां पे उन्होंने दे मेड अ कॉन्शियस एफर्ट. ओके, दे सजेस्ट दैट there was an active human engagement rather than the natural endurance without any effort. So this goes against the author's idea. B is the closest. Okay. Now let's see question number 3 here. The author would agree with each of the following except. Okay. So let's see what is the answer to this question. Okay. I think so that this was an easy question. ये होना चाहिए था that the author would agree with all of the following except, right? Let's see that why, what are the other, negate the other options. Okay, because D is the correct answer. Now Hebrew and Yiddish have different symbolic roles. Okay, so that's absolutely correct. Okay, उन्होंने बोला ही था ना, contrast की बात करी थी उधर उन्होंने, या to combat the deficit. So to combat the deficit, Hebrew needed to be revived. So इसके जो deficits थे जो इस language के, okay, आपकी ये this Yiddish language के जो deficit थे, to combat this deficit, Hebrew needed to be revived. Okay, and then we can say that they say that Hebrew somewhat in sharp contrast with the large nose. Okay, the myth sprung of the Hebrew pioneer, which officially became the national language of the state. Okay, which is being spoken by it. Okay, whereas we can say that this language remains without a homeland. Okay, it is symbolizes as diaspora. Diaspora is exile. Okay, so that's okay, without an army, without this. So this clearly makes the contrast. Okay, Hebrew का तो खुद का state हो गया था ना, उसको officially became the national language of the state. Okay, Israel की इधर नहीं था, it was without a homeland. So this is definitely not the answer, right? Yiddish serves as a cultural unifier. Okay, yeah, that was a case. Okay, जहाँ पे उन्होंने बात करी थी yeah. So, as in the case of this, Yiddish was the lingua franca of Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, Lithuanian, and other Jews, allowing them to have a neutral meeting ground while inhabiting the same stateless culture. Okay. So, from this, we can we can detect that Yiddish unified Jews across many regions which do not have a shared, I mean, like we can say a homeland. So, definitely, Yiddish serves as a cultural unifier. Yiddish has served as a tool of activism, right? Yes, this was also the case यहाँ पे जब उसने बात करी थी. So it was the backbone of the Jewish labor movement in the United States, and the feminist Emma Goldman champions women, okay, and free love in Yiddish, okay. And moreover, वो Kahan, okay, editor-in-chief forwards, okay, daily in the news at the turn of the century saw the language as a tool for educating Jewish immigrants about the rights. Okay, so we can definitely say that the Yiddish as a language was an important tool for activism. Okay, now Yiddish has a tainted history. Now this is nowhere being mentioned. I mean, like, okay, the author would agree with each of the following कि Yiddish की जो history है वो tainted है. Okay, nowhere does the author in the passage calls Yiddish itself tainted. Okay, the author calls its survival एक जगह था miraculous, हमने discuss करा था उसको. Yeah, so its sheer endurance is nothing short of miraculous. Okay, it does not call it tainted. Okay, it calls it miraculous. Okay, and then he say wills to live seems inexhaustible. Okay, and then survival is an act of stubbornness. Okay, so that is, we can say that the language is the I mean like the author, no doubt. अगर I mean like अब इसको कंफ्यूज हो जाओगे कि वो यहाँ पे उसका हॉस्टिलिटी है यिदिश का by this guy masculine or by Zionist, okay, so that's the other case, okay, या फिर नाजीज वाली बात पे, so the negative views are portrayed as external forces, okay, but it is nothing to say that the Yiddish has a tainted history, okay, the passage treats Yiddish history with respect, okay, nostalgia, okay, Yiddish को उसने कहीं पे भी ये नहीं बोला है कि Yiddish has a tainted history, okay, वो आई मीन वो यिदिश की हिस्ट्री नहीं है ना, जब हम मास्कुलिन और आई एम श्योर दैट यहाँ पे कंफ्यूजन होगा कि इन दोनों का है तो इन लोगों के कारण जो उसकी हिस्ट्री है वो खराब रही है, ओके, that's not the case, okay. The negative views are portrayed as external forces that were actually trying to I mean like extinct this Yiddish ko, okay, but again this is not the case. I mean like in case if I can actually help you with an easy choice for this answer. So Yiddish, let me look for the lines maybe that would give us a better idea. If just a second, right? So I mean like there's no direct line, okay, but यही है कि ऑथर ने कहीं पे भी हिस्ट्री को यिदिश की हिस्ट्री को टेंटेड नहीं बोला, okay. So languages have faced adversity, okay. A language has been put to extinction. It has been suffering marginalization and it's facing other challenges, okay. But despite all these, okay, the language has survived, okay. So the author's tone when discussing this hardship is kind of maybe to tell you कि उसका जो sheer endurance, देखो sheer endurance is nothing short of miraculous, okay. So it's a more of an admiration of Yiddish you can say endurance, okay, rather than viewing it as a tainted. So वहां पे नहीं है, and rest of the others are easily negated. So I mean like in case if you have a bout of doubt here, could have been easily sought out, right? Now let's go to the last question. So which one of the following sentences from the passage can be considered as a thesis statement, okay. Now I hope you all know what is a thesis statement, okay. So kind of we can say that the thesis, so whenever let's say in case you'll be doing PhD or something, I don't know how many of you will be interested, okay. So it's kind of you can say the thesis is a backbone of an essay, okay. So it's a backbone of an essay, okay. So it actually tells you कि क्या क्या उसमें main arguments रहेंगी, okay. It also helps the readers navigate that what are they expecting with this particular text, okay. So that is the case कि वो क्या रहेगा. So which of the following sentences from the passage can be considered as a thesis statement, okay. So maybe in short it could be a kind of a structure based question, okay. Now for a language without a physical address that has come frighteningly close to extinctions, Yiddish means to live inexhaustible. That is what, okay, aptly fulfills this role, okay. Now we can say that this sentence introduces kind of Yiddish as a subject, okay. So, and it says that Yiddish wills to live seems inexhaustible, okay. And also it says that Yiddish has faced a lot of resilience, okay. And I mean like because of the I mean like close because of the I mean like despite I would say, okay. So despite a lot of adversities, okay, the Yiddish as the language still survive, okay. So that's the case that this stands the thesis statement. यही author का thesis रहा होगा, main cornerstone रहा होगा essay का whenever he would be trying to write an essay on it, right? जब भी उसने सोचा होगा तो उसके दिमाग में क्या thesis वाला रहा होगा, okay? So now let's see the other options then in that case, like so for a language without a physical address that had come frightening, and this is in fact the opening sentence. No? So the authors often begin with their thesis. This is also one of the clues that you can take, okay? And it contains two central ideas where the whole passage is developed. So one is that ki Yiddish endangered hai, close to extinction hai, and the second idea that is being discussed is that despite this, it survives, okay, with resilience, inexhaustible hai, okay, and everything else in the passage is kind of telling you about the history, origin kya hai, challenges kya hai, okay. Still, the this Yiddish as a language endure all of this, right? Now, in contrast, Yiddish represents exile, a longing for home. Okay. Now, this is just one interpretation of Yiddish. Okay, कि इतना सब होने के बाद में भी इट इज जस्ट रिप्रेजेंटिंग द एग्जाइल वहां पे था ना जहाँ पे हेब्रू की बात करी थी उन्होंने ओके सो या ग्राउंड फॉर दिस द लैंग्वेज ऑफ अ होमलेसनेस विदाउट अ ट्रू नेशनल voice okay but again this is not this is just I would say just very narrow okay it appears somewhere in the middle of the passage when the author was contrasting this Hebrew and Yiddish as a language okay but it does not summarize up the whole passage so you can say that the main thesis is kind of a main idea okay you can also refer it to that way so it's a narrow option okay so cannot be the answer it does not cover the entire aspect of the passage okay now yet nostalgia and not alone cannot push a revival beyond its narrow means okay again this is the same thing okay so here this the author mentioned this particular line okay because you want to give a word of caution okay he wants to say that revival is just one part of the larger story of the Yiddish survival. Okay, it cannot be the thesis that yes, nostalgia alone cannot push a revival. Okay, no, not the main idea. Okay, it continues to be a language without a homeland, without an army, a flag, and this is again, it's just the mere, you can say, kind of describing, I would say, the current condition of Yiddish, okay, but it's more of a supporting detail. Again, it's not covering the main idea that the author has written the paragraph on, okay. So that's the reason I think so it becomes an easy negation. This was could be an easy question okay so this is very specific again very specific aspect of Yiddish okay so exile and a longing sense of longing for home okay so it does not give the view on Yiddish as a language that has survived against so many odds वो नहीं दिया ना उसने okay ये तो negative तरीके से कर रहा है इसको present now again this yet nostalgia alone cannot push a revival beyond its narrow means okay again very limited on the relying on the nostalgia okay but the passage is more focused on Yiddish revival survival adaptability to the obstacles okay now again option 4 is just I would say one of the limitations okay the current limitation of Yiddish as a language but again it's a survival will is inexhaustible not being covered is definitely the answer I hope you got this passage and